I'm Hunter Atkins, CEO of the Bank of Nashville. Our 10-branch bank has been a sponsor of the CEO Cafe for 3 years now. Today's program is going to be NancySchultz and DanReardon of North Highland Company. North Highland is an international business consultant. Today they're going to focus on strategic planning.
I'm Roddy Story from the Bank of Nashville. I want to thank y'all for coming. Y'all have a real treat in store for you today. Earlier, NancySchultz and DanReardon from North Highland talked about strategic planning in times of change, and I think you've got really a lot to look forward to. So this should really be good. I'd like to introduce Doug Ryan from IDS, who, as you know, hosts this event. Doug?
I want to thank everybody for coming. My name is Doug Ryan, and I am the Director of Commercial Sales here at IDS. And you're sitting in what we call the conference room of the future. No more boardroom tables, but comfortable chairs that can be reconfigured for an event like today where we've got a speaker, or you can have group sessions or sit together. You'll find cup holders, and it's a comfortable way to spend a meeting previously where you'd be sitting at a big long table. So. We are a Steelcase dealer primarily. We're happy to co-sponsor this event. I can take you on a tour afterward if you'd like and show you what else we do on the interior design and furniture business. So thank you for coming, and thank you for the time to say hello.
Thanks, Doug. Also, I'd like to introduce Kim Milligan from MEAC, which is Channel 10, who will be filming today. They are, as you would imagine, key to this, and I also like to introduce Jim Fuller, who is sort of the engine that drives the CEO Cafe. Thank y'all very much.
Thanks. You're in for a treat with our speakers. I heard them earlier this morning. The Bank of Nashville has made this event possible. We appreciate their sponsorship. They are a very active bank in the community. I'm going to introduce Hunter and let him introduce the speaker, but the bank is a reflection in a lot of ways of Hunter. He's a 30-year banking, has a 30-year banking history, but has kind of an old school, down-to-earth, personable style of banking philosophy with kind of the high-tech, modern financial tools available to do what you need to do. Is that a fair way to say that? I don't know. Not sure what you just said, but there is a very personable style there, and we appreciate that, and we appreciate the fact that that same philosophy has kind of flowed over into this event. Rather than making it a stiff, formal event with just a lecturer, there'll be a presentation, and then literally there is a cafe here. So, and the reason for that name is to have a conversation. So the presentation will take place, and then there'll be plenty of time for Q&A, and feel free to do that because that's the main purpose of this. And all of those in the viewing audience, this is part of a public service by MEAC and IDS and the Bank of Nashville, and is brought to the city of Nashville as a public service to encourage business and encourage enrichment, particularly of the leadership of business. Hunter?
Today, DanReardon and NancySchultz are with us from North Highland. They are a consulting company, both internationally and nationally, and Nancy runs the local Nashville office. In an earlier session, we said they're going to talk about strategic planning, and then I said to myself, is it their strategic planning, or is it strategic planning they help their clients with? And the answer is both, because they're a growing company, a dynamic company, and they've seen some of the struggles that other companies have on their own just as well as being a consultant. So they help Vanderbilt and Nissan and Gaylord and other local companies, and strategic planning has never been more important with the stresses we see in today's economy. So with that, I'll turn the mic over to the pros. Thank you.
My background is consulting for 23 years, and did it with the Big Five and worked with Dan also with the Big Five, traveled all over this wonderful country. But it's nice to work with all of you and similar but different companies in town and be able to raise my family at the same time. But the topic I think is very relevant with today's economy, and we've been working with a lot of companies and how to either right size them, get healthy through this down economy, and how do we power through this and come out winners on the other end, get through '09, which is our first feat, and then how do you get ready for 10 and be primed so we can continue the growth curve. So I think we've got a lot to share today as far as kind of our North Highland story, but then also we can pepper in just a lot of projects and tasks we've done with our clients and how we've helped them get through some of these down times and get ready for the future. I think Dan will tell you just a little bit about North Highland and kind of our growth story. It's been quite a story over the last 16, 17 years, and we're making some changes this year and getting ready for 2010 also.
Yeah. And it's I'm gonna move over here so I'm not buried in a corner. But it's unusual for us to talk about ourselves because we're used to talking about clients. So feel free to fire off questions because I think the topic of strategic planning and execution is probably more relevant than telling you our company history. But we thought to ground ourselves this morning, we'd start out with a little bit of who and what we are, which is on this slide here. You heard earlier that we're about 16 years old. I joined about 12 years ago when it was 20 people and about $2 million in revenue just in Atlanta. And it was all about staying local and getting off the road. My wife gave me a choice of find a new job or find a new family. So I thought about that for a little while.
You chose well, so that's
yeah,
good.
yeah. But we kind of hit a groove and clients were liking what we were doing, and we very quickly found Nancy and reconnected from our days when we worked together and opened Orlando and Nashville, and then that taught us that we can do this in lots of places. So fast forward 12 years, we're now about a $200 million company, and our hope is to be a $1 billion company in about 10 years. What's interesting, I think, about this history is as we grew, we had to go through what we're going to show you that we take our clients through. So we eat our own medicine. And that is we hit certain life cycles and needed different both strategies and leadership styles based on the life cycle, which is the size of the company. So we had to shift from a kind of, we're all in this together, let's get all 20 of us in a room and make decisions about where we're going to go, to when we hit 150 folks. That wasn't very practical anymore, and when you're in multiple cities. So you need more sort of structure, I guess would be a good word. And then as you hit 500 folks to 800 and we're working toward 1,000, it looks a little bit more like a big company structure where you have to have accountability and measurement systems in place. So we're going to talk some about that. Probably the most interesting part of our history is when we hit a certain size, it was probably when we were at about 100 million in revenue, and our clients were the companies you rattled off here in Nashville and in Atlanta. It's a big soft drink company that we're not allowed to mention the name of, and companies like that. We focus on the large organizations in the cities that we're in, and a lot of them are international. So they started pushing us. Well, if we need work done in London, how do we do that? Because you're a local company. So in 2005, we started a sister company called Highland Worldwide, which we use to find companies like us around the world that we can partner with, and we have a very tight partnership agreement with those companies, and we were able to go through Europe and find companies that look a lot like us so we could serve these multinationals instead of our competitors coming in and serving them in Europe and then working their way back into the United States. So it was actually more of a defensive strategy than an offensive strategy. And then once that volume of work started going, we realized, well, there's an economic play there as well. So now we're in the process of acquiring our London partner. So we've got about 100 folks in London now, in addition to the 750 we have here. And then I'm sure all of you, it's the hot topic is, what do you do about China? And a lot of our clients were asking, what can North Highland help us with in China? And the answer was not much until about 2 months ago, we opened our first office there in Shanghai. And to get us going, we've partnered with about a 30-person firm in Shanghai. So kind of our foray now that we're in the latter stages of what we're going to talk about this morning, of how do you go from sort of local to national to global. So we're kind of living a lot of the stuff that we help our clients think through.
Well, I think that's a good segue into kind of this slide, and it's mainly when we go through strategic planning, whether it be at North Highland or whether it be with our clients, we kind of want to anchor, where are we and where are we trying to go? And those are questions that you have to ask yourself as you're going through this process on a yearly basis, monthly basis, 3 to 5 years out. And this kind of just shows, where are you on the business continuum? And then, is there a plan for that enterprise evolution? I mean, you've got kind of an emerging, and this is just an illustration, but, if you were today here at an emerging level, which is, kind of informal practices based on experience, probably not the structure that Dan talks about. And then as you move through the continuum, moving into best of breed, establishing excellence within those functions, but not across the functions, within each function. And then moving into that industry leader, national leader, and global. And so we'll talk about North Highland in a minute, but as far as each individual company, you kind of have to decide, well, where are we and where are we trying to go before you can kind of create the roadmap to get there and go through then the strategic planning process. And each of these, and each company, you have to kind of answer those questions yourselves, but you may not want to get all the way to the end of the continuum and be that global participant. We have a lot of clients that will probably stay at emerging for most of their history, or maybe get to best of breed. But then we have other clients that are, trying to be on that high growth curve, whether it be in healthcare or the music industry, that type of thing in Nashville specifically. And then how do you establish that plan to get there? And it's a journey. It's not a sprint. So obviously there are then things that have to be put in place over this year and then the next year, and kind of create that whole roadmap in order to get there. And then, just to the whole CEO theme, at each level, the CEO's function will be different at each stage, whether from the strategic thinking to the leadership style. And a leadership style of a CEO also can drive the evolution of this business continuum, and also then drive, obviously, the leaders that are part of the leadership team. So what we've done, at North Highland as well as with clients, is kind of create that roadmap in order to move along that evolution. And Dan, you can probably, we've spent a lot of time as a company. I've been here 10 years and at North Highland, and I've seen tremendous growth, and Dan's been a big part of the fueling of that growth. And as I always say, even we had a couple off-sites the last few months, and it's going to be a wild ride for the next 10 years too. So Dan is a growth type CEO, and we were chatting. We had a kind of a get-together, a town hall for our office last night while Dan was in town. And, just talking about that, because as CEO, you've read a lot of articles, and a CEO is supposed to spend, 80% thinking strategically and then 20% thinking tactically. And so, only where you are on that percentage. But Dan is definitely a strategic thinker, and as a result, we've seen tremendous growth. And growth is just one aspect, obviously, from a strategic standpoint. There are other aspects. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you've done the last 10 years.
Well, I've Nancy's right. I have spent a big chunk of time over the last couple of years on this: how do we become a national player and how do we become a global player? And we also talked last night, this is an interesting year. I'm sure it's a very interesting year for all of your companies as well. So that 80-20 kind of flipped back this year. It's much more tactical orientation. So we're putting South America on hold for a while. I think we can wait on those investments and just try to work on our European and China plays. And, I'll come back to the leadership styles, because I think it's very relevant. Particularly, Nashville's famous for cranking out a lot of really cool companies. It seems to be a hotbed of startups and high growth businesses. And we're no different than I think what we see in most of our clients. So, just for clarity, I'm not the founder of North Highland. It was started by a guy named Dave Peterson. And Dave's probably one of the best, we call him chaos theory leaders that I've ever worked with. He's an idea guy, and it's just You know, he doesn't like structure, he doesn't like rules, he doesn't like any of that stuff, but he loves just getting in there and mucking around with it. And that's really great when you're small. That doesn't work so well if you've got 100 folks. And what I've always been very impressed with Dave is he recognized that my leadership style is not what you need when you get to a certain size. So that's when he asked me to become the CEO, because I am about structure, as Nancy talked about, and about setting goals and then holding folks accountable to those goals. And I think at certain sizes, that's why I mentioned earlier, the leadership style has to shift. So I don't think we could be where we are with chaos theory leadership playing on a national level. I don't see too many companies where that works very well. The interesting shift for us is as we go down that continuum and continue to grow is I now need to I jokingly say I've had this company, it's probably not a very good analogy, but I've had it by the throat for a couple of years because we had to change the way we were doing some stuff, and you have to be very hands-on to do that. And so I've had to learn to let go and let Nancy do what Nancy does over the last couple of years, and let the other office leaders and now people in London and China where you can't see them very often, you just have to sort of trust and set the goals and then measure against those and see if you're getting where you want to be.
And I think that the key to strategic planning, I mean, there are all different methodologies, but the key is it's a process. And it's a process you go through, and you don't go through it just once. I mean, you go through it often. Probably you have a strategic planning yearly, annual type process that you go through. But it's a lot of the things we've been talking about around defining it, setting the goals, coming up with plan and execute. I mean, a lot of the clients that we work with, they'll spend the time, talking about strategic planning, come up with the roadmap, but a lot of it doesn't get executed. And I think that's a key point. Making it an actionable enough plan. You don't want to have too many things on there, and we're seeing a lot of that. Probably a lot of you are doing that within your companies too. There are a few key probably projects, a few key objectives, and with the down economy, you've probably even seen those, have a shorter list that you can accomplish. Because I think that's the key. You want to be able to execute it, and then the whole accountability and monitoring aspect of it is so important. I mean, how do you set objectives, the roadmap for the year, but then hold people accountable and make them actionable items that can then have some metrics around it and that you can continue to monitor throughout the year. And we do that internally at North Highland. We have our annual strategic planning process, and we do it at the local office level and then kind of come together at the company level. But the key is making them actionable, and then I'm held accountable to achieve those objectives throughout the year. And I think the accountability is always a key aspect that we find that a lot of times is lacking in companies, and it's not by any malicious reason. It's just it's just holding people accountable, and that can be hard. But you also have to make them measurable enough so that you can see if there's been progress along the way. I don't know if you have any thoughts just on North Highland.
I'll throw out a couple ideas. The first one, which we probably should have mentioned on the previous slide, is as you're setting these goals, who do we want to be as a company? A lot of companies start thinking of who do they want to be rather than who do my customers want me to be. So had I said 10 years ago, as soon as I joined the company, we should be global, but all of our customers tended to be smaller local companies, then we probably would be out of business right now because the customers didn't drive us there. So I think it's extremely relevant to stay talking to your customers and look at it through that filter of, how can we better serve them, and then how do we differentiate ourselves from everybody else who's serving them. So for us, we had to look at our industry and say, it's not very sexy to think about it this way, but consulting is becoming a commodity if it's not already a commodity. It's very hard to differentiate between our people and Accenture and IBM. I mean, quite frankly, most of our people came from Accenture or IBM or Deloitte or something like that, so it becomes even harder to differentiate. So we had to look at the marketplace, say, well, how do, if it's all the same, then how do we make us different? And our angle there was looking at the number of failed projects that are out there and decided, well, we'll differentiate by guaranteeing our work. So we guarantee the results of whatever project we do our clients are happy or we keep working until they are. As far as I know, there's nobody else out there in the marketplace doing that. So that gives us a relationship with customers that we can talk about as a starting point, because all of our competitors will go in and say, well, we're global too. We're national. We do ERP installations, we do strategy work, we do process work, we do change management. So there's no way for us to be any different. But if we start out with, well, we guarantee our work, they go, oh, well, nobody else does that. So figure out how to be different, and then figure out what your clients need, and then set your goals around that. The accountability thing's interesting. I was at a forum similar to this last week up in New York City, and was asked the question of what's more important, strategy or execution, which I think is a trick question. Well, not a fair question, because the answer is it depends on whether you have a good strategy or not. If you've got a decent or good enough strategy, then execution becomes more important. If you've got a terrible strategy, then strategy becomes much more important. But most companies we find have a good enough strategy, but they really struggle with the execution, which is what Nancy was talking about. And because we guarantee our work, that becomes very important to us. How do we help companies execute? So we spend a lot of energy and research and investment on figuring out, well, how can we help companies execute better? And there's two big things that we find companies do that hurt themselves on execution. And I ask you guys to reflect back on this, and we can kick it around a little bit. And certainly if you don't agree, start firing questions at me, and we'll debate it right here. The first one is you assign somebody to a task, and then before they finish the task, you reassign them to something else. So it might be a 2-year project to get it fully executed, to get about a year and a half into it. Something else comes up and you say, oh, Sally, Bob, we now need you to go do this other thing. And so before you've got full loop learning or closure on the project, you move that executive somewhere else. And then somebody else comes in and they don't own it. They might not even agree with it, but they're sort of handed it and they've got to finish it. And we see that the bigger the company, usually the more often that happens. And to me, that's a death knell for execution. The second big one is what Nancy was talking about, is accountability. We find, and we've sort of had to do some learning ourselves here as we've grown, that most people, and we were this way, are very good at setting goals at the beginning of the year, and you even write them down if you're good, and you tell everybody exactly what you want them to do. And then you get to the end of the year and you can't find that piece of paper anymore. And you just sort of reflect back on, well, they're a good person, they did a good job, you know, and it comes to bonus time and you just sort of wing it. We find most of our clients do that, as opposed to having some of the tools in place that we've had to develop and we help a lot of clients develop. Say, well, let's write down those goals at the beginning. Let's put some actual numbers next to it. In our case, it's revenue numbers, it's utilization of our workforce. That's one of our biggest metrics. Profitability, of course, by office and stuff like that. New clients, right? And then put a system in place where we can keep that and measure against it and pretty easily get numbers at the end of the year, so we can sit down and say, well, you know, here's what you said you were going to do, and here's what you actually did. And the challenge for us, and I think it would be for most of you as well, is a lot of times they did really great things. It just didn't happen to be anything on this list. And so what do you do with that? You know, I mean, if the world changed dramatically. So in our case, I mean, I'll make it very specific. We look for the companies that we want to work with, and at the beginning of the year we come up with these. This is a list of clients in Nashville that we really think we align well with, what we do and what they need. So we'd like to be in that company. And we may get to the end of the year and we're in 3 other companies doing work, but we're not in that company. So is that success or is that failure? And it's a combination of both. It's success and failure. But if we don't focus on the failure part, then we're not going to be able to fix it next year. So we went through years of just sort of high-fiving each other, because we've had, you know, we probably averaged about 30% growth per year over the last 10 years or so. So you can get pretty excited about that. Then you hit this year and it's a whole lot harder, and you find out, well, how much of that was rising tide growth because the whole consulting industry was going wild, and how much was because we were just more clever than everybody else. And that's been very enlightening for us this year. We found out, you know, some of our folks really are rock stars, and some people that may have rock star status are very good players, but they never seem to do what they said they were going to do. They just wind up doing something else, and that becomes hard as a management team to count on. Can we get the stuff done? If we have to get that done, will that person be able to do it? So it's been very eye-opening for me this year. And when I threw that out up in New York, a lot of nodding heads, a lot of agreement. I think it probably is relevant to the size of the business. The bigger the business, the more you move folks around, and the harder it is to know exactly what that accountability is. And that's where, when I talked earlier about the leadership style needing to go to more structure as you move down that continuum, that's the kind of structure that helps, because you can drive, if you use a system, you can drive that down into multiple levels of the organization.
Question?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I wonder how your founder would answer that question about that rock star that ended up doing some projects that weren't on the list, but was very successful.
He'd say it doesn't matter. Because I've had that conversation with him. And maybe it doesn't matter. So I think it depends, right, as to whether or not it matters. Because it's good if we did things that we didn't plan on doing. I think that's good. Is it great? I don't know that I can go there, but it's still good.
Yeah.
And I've learned the hard way. You know, the last 10 years, I've had to change a lot in my leadership style, but also one of my personas and part of my personality is growth. I mean, I like to, I'm a goal setter, I'm an achiever. I have a goal to set, and even for our Nashville office before I retire in 10 plus years or so. And I had to adjust too the last 10 years, because we got to a certain level, and you've probably seen that in your companies, and then spinning's not the right word, but you kind of do the same revenue a couple years in a row, and something has to change. And so this whole planning and executing, I mean, you may set objectives, but you have to something has to change in order. I mean, I think that's the definition of insanity. Unless something changes, it's insanity. And so we had to adjust, and Dan challenged me a lot. I mean, we were doing, rock star status of opening new accounts, but we weren't opening the type accounts that were going to get us to the next level of that business continuum. So the planning and executing phase here was real important, because a different structure had to be put in place, a different go-to-market, whether it be acquisition of resources or a business, in your case, that type thing. And we worked really hard on that the last couple of years. And in 2008, we were able to achieve that. And now I think it's been very helpful to us in 2009, because of some of the changes we made, it's helped us power through this down economy. So really challenge yourself on this, because the process is similar probably as far as the timing and depending on when your fiscal year is, but each year challenge yourself what needs to change within this process, because otherwise you're probably going to get the same results. And I lived that and worked through that, and Dan was a big help to get us through that, and I think we're moving to that next level, and then something else is going to have to change.
One of the things that we did, this may be a better answer to your question, is one of the things that we did in the last couple of years is ask all of our leaders and put them through some assessment process to help with this, but to make sure that they know what are they good at and what are they not as good at, right? Pretty important stuff to know. And I think most people know what they're good at and what they're not good at, but most people also spend a tremendous amount of energy trying to hide what they're not good at. They don't want to talk about it, right? But you spend 5 minutes with somebody and you know what they're not good at, because you can't hide that stuff. So I told all of our leaders, unless you can tell me, unless you're comfortable telling me what you're not good at, then I don't know that you know what you're not good at. So if we can talk about it, then I have more faith that you're going to find somebody to shore up your weaknesses. So it's a pretty uncomfortable year and a half to 2 years when we're going through that process. But I expect all the office leaders and all the executives that we have in the company to be able to say, this is what I'm good at, and this is where I need some help. And then I can say, all right, well, how are you getting that help? And it just opened up everything. So that person who's the rock star who doesn't like to ever do what you ask them to do but goes off and does something else, well, we can find stuff for somebody who's really good at greenfielding and coming up with new ideas. We'll probably use them to come up with new services for us to do. Or just cut them loose and say, just go get clients, right? We won't use you as a strategic alignment to a specific client. We'll use you more as just a random revenue generator. So that, to me, that was very powerful, because then you can talk about career progression, because if somebody's not good at holding people accountable, then as we get bigger, I don't want them in a role where they're managing a big chunk of our business. I'd rather have them in a more freewheeling, probably more on the revenue generation side, where they're not managing people. They're more interacting with you guys.
Yes, please, Jim.
We're hoping you'll ask
please.
questions. The same way you did it, and I'll add one more. 20 people is a great size. You get over 20 people, and you got group theory coming in, and it just starts to fall apart when you're doing the hardcore strategic planning. One of the things that I encourage folks to do, and I think is a great idea, and we're doing it ourselves, is to get it to draft form. So don't make it really pretty. Have it still look a little rough around the edges, and then share that with the whole company. And say, this is draft. We want everybody to opine on it, or give us thoughts. Are we right or wrong? Or depending on what your geography is, we're going to go through this process in the fall for our company. So I will probably take that around and do a road show with each one of our cities and say, directionally, here's where we think we should be, but I want feedback from everybody. Now, the reality is it's probably not going to change a whole lot, but you talked about the buy-in of the folks, and so now everybody in the company feels like they contributed to that strategic plan. And you'll find that a lot more folks, 5, 6, 7 layers below the team that put it together now feel a part of that process. Or use technology. You can set up an email account just for strategic planning, so you share it and have people send messages back to you. Or put we've had some clients who assign somebody in each location to shop it around and solicit feedback, so you don't have to deal with, I don't know that I want 750 emails coming to me with opinions on what word should be used in each box of our strategic plan. But if we have somebody in each city that kind of collects those and can consolidate them, then we can sit down with those folks. And then loop it back and say where you changed it based on that feedback that you got. So you just kind of make them know that you listened and they were part of that process.
We have a client that we went through a similar but different process and got the company to buy in on the strategic plan. And then it was interesting, they made it very simple. There were kind of 3 key objectives. And the CEO's whole plan was, at any point in time, and he would test this in the hallway, whatever you were working on, how did it tie to those top 3 objectives for the year, for the next 3 years, whatever the time frame would be. And you had to be able to articulate it back to him or her in the hallway. I mean, he would catch you on the spot. And he did a lot of it at first and worked through it with you. I mean, if you didn't get it right, okay, let's talk about it. And that was pretty powerful too, taking kind of the buy-in to a whole nother level and then making it actionable and very purposeful to each individual's role in the company throughout the entire year. So he didn't do it just for the first month. I mean, if it's November, he's still asking you, well, Bob, what are you working on, and how does that relate to our strategic objectives? So that was a whole nother way to do it, and it was his idea, and we kind of helped him execute it. And then they kind of rolled it out, and then everyone would carry those around with them. I mean, it was always almost on their person. So just another idea of how to implement it.
How often do you run into the situation where the key leader, it's kind of like what got you here won't get you there? When you run into the situation, who got you here can't get you there. And yet that who wants to hold on too long. You see it with athletes, you see it with CEOs, I would think. Jim, our last questioner and our last speaker here at CEO Cafe, I think is a great example, if I can use you, Jim. The person who founded the company was an IT fellow who was wonderful, but called Jim and said, I'm an IT fellow, I'm not a CEO. You come sit in this big office and be. So he recognized and brought you. Jim has reached a point where now they've got another surge they're hitting in this company he's in, and he has made the decision to step down as CEO and become chairman of the board and say somebody else who doesn't have 5 grandchildren and doesn't want to spend that much time, needs to take us to the next level. But that's a volunteer. Seems like that's the question for key leaders in this room, many of whom are CEOs, to come to the point that they say, wait a minute, I want to voluntarily step aside and help find that person that's going to carry it. But how difficult is that, and how unusual is that? And what do you do with somebody, either in a family business who won't let go and turn it over to the next generation, or in a key leadership role who won't hand off the power?
I think it happens a lot in most startup companies. I live in Atlanta, and Georgia Tech's right down the street, and I think Atlanta has a reputation, if it may even be fact, of cranking out the most startups and having the most failures of businesses. So 9 out of 10 companies that start fail. And intuitively, I would link that to, we got a lot of engineers coming out of Georgia Tech. They invent a great idea. They're the CEO because they invented it. They start the business. You get to a size where now sales, marketing, and human resources become very important. That's not their forte, but they don't let go, and they wind up failing. So I think you could attribute quite a lot of failure rate when you're going from small to mid-sized company to the leadership characteristics. And that's where I was referring earlier. The leadership style has to change based on the size of the company. So I think the people that are able to do that are the ones who can reflect inside enough and answer that question, what am I good at and what am I not good at? And you can go to the bookstore and there's about 100 books written on that topic because it's very relevant. There's one called A Hero's Farewell that I read a little while ago because I knew the guy who wrote it. And it's all about how hard that is and how do you do that gracefully and how do the rest of us do that with dignity for the person who's leaving, because I think that's a key to the process.
And I think there are a couple key points to the process that needs to take place. I mean, you always want to hopefully surround yourself with, I was always taught, surround yourself with key people and potential leaders that are even better than yourself. I mean, a lot of it comes from within, and do you feel threatened by that? But how do you surround yourself with that key team? Because hopefully then from a succession planning standpoint, that type person could take over. But also then keep going.
Say we have time for about 3 more questions.
Okay.
But along that line, how do you plan for that succession? What Jim was saying is, what happens if you get hit by a bus? Who are the top 2 candidates who are going to take over for you?
Exactly.
Let's prepare them to do that. But
Right.
it seems like a lot of times there's to make yourself indispensable, you don't have any backup. But that's a blessing and a curse when you do
Well,
that.
exactly. And then I think the accountability model is key too. Having an accountability model for you yourself as the CEO, whether it be a board, whether it be a leadership team or whatever, because I think, it's lonely at the top, but you have to be held accountable too, whatever the structure may be, and there are ways to do that effectively.
John, you had a question over there.
I guess the follow-up was just for your own company. It sounds like you were in a succession plan where you had a chaos theorist, I guess what you said, and then you were stepping in. And could you talk a little bit about how that worked? Like, did he say on Friday, on Monday it's you, or did he for 6 months take you by the hand? And then what happened when invariably you made a decision where he said, that was the stupidest thing I've ever heard? How did you deal with that? Did he communicate? How did you communicate that?
So the way it happened for us is it took place over about a year. So what happened is I started going to our then CEO saying, we really need to deal with this. This isn't working anymore. And I'm starting to bug him a lot about some structural stuff that I thought needed to change. And eventually he said, well, then you deal with it, right?
Here you go.
Right. So that's literally how it started. And then we started that conversation where he came to me and said, I know that this isn't my strength, and over the course of the next year, let's just get you into this role. So I knew a year before Nancy or anybody else knew that I was going to wind up with this job. And I think that's a pretty healthy way to do it. So a year is a long enough period of time where you're through a complete business cycle, so you're talking about everything you need to talk about within that cycle. Now the benefit is he had somebody in-house. If you have to go outside to get your next leader, that becomes quite challenging because then you've got a new CEO and the old one is still there and probably wants to spend a year holding hands with the new one, and I doubt that the new person really wants that very much. And that's where you see a lot of
Well, and the culture's very important to make sure that the cultures fit together too. And you had kind of come through the culture of North Holland.
We did do, to your question, we're a private company. We're actually employee-owned, 100% employee-owned through a ESOP, which is an employee stock ownership plan. So our employees own the company. But we have a outside board of directors that's pretty powerful. And they push me for succession planning and who's it going to be, when's it going to happen, what are the roles, and just that level of accountability on me. So I actually pay people to beat me up 4 times a year. But I think it's very healthy for a private company to have outside board members that are real board members. There's a lot of talk about that in the marketplace now. You don't want people that will just go along with whatever you say. You want people to really push you.
I think
Two more questions.
Art,
I think they're trying to get a microphone to whoever's asking the question.
Really, one follow-up to both these. I mean,
Okay.
this is a town of very entrepreneurial folks, and just what you've done, you've gone from founder to the next leader. What are some lessons learned, either that worked well or didn't work, as you all made that transition?
Dave did a really good job of positioning me, saying, this is what we need right now. And I think it takes a big person to do that. I think that's hard to do. But I think it's the leader's role to make the next leader successful. You can set them up for success or set them up for failure. So I think that's probably the biggest key, is recognizing what do we need and then what's the right role for the former CEO. In our case, he became chairman, and I like the separation of chairman and CEO. I think that's the right way to go. And he became kind of our cultural ambassador and goes to all our training sessions and talks about, here's where we came from, here's why we're different, here's what's important about North Highland. And our employees love it. They love that he's still there and that he's still involved and he's still representing who we are. So we've very much separated what I do from what he does.
Are there any steps along the way that you would have done differently?
Well, we probably could have done it in 6 months instead of a year, but I don't know about that. No, actually, for us it worked. It was pretty good. I was, a relatively young guy for the role at that time. So I'm 45 now, so that was like 6 years ago. So it's late 30s, it's a big job. So I think taking time and doing it that way worked very well.
Thank you.
One more question.
In the early stage companies, when the strategy planning group is sort of the C-level executive group.
Right, 3 people in a room.
Exactly, and maybe there's a facilitator, but usually not. And often it's sort of an academic experiment. And then when you get into the actual plan, some of the tactics, maybe even some of the strategy doesn't really make sense. But the feedback loop isn't quite there either. And one of the benefits of being an early stage company is that you can make those changes, but often they don't get made based on what's happening in the market because you're so married to the existing strategy. I mean, how do you manage that process at that stage?
I think probably the most strategic thing you could do in strategic planning at that stage is to have a facilitator, to have a disposable agitator that's in there to really challenge you. And it should be somebody, I tell our folks, we need to go right to the edge of being thrown out of the room and then back off just a little bit. But if you're comfortable at the end of the process, then the facilitator didn't do their job. Because they should absolutely challenge you on every assumption you're making and be asking those questions. Is that really what your customers want, or is that just something cool that you think would be neat to do? Which you see a lot of companies go spend a lot of money. You see it a lot in the software business. This is really cool software. Too bad nobody wants it, right? So somebody should have been in that process earlier on to say, have you talked to any customers about this? So having and I would call it a disposable person, because they're probably going to irritate you enough in that process that you're not going to want them around afterwards.
Well, and I think there are ways to pull your customers into it too. I mean, they may not be in the room with the facilitator, but again, it's a process. And then how do you, I mean, we do that a lot. We'll bounce ideas off our clients. I mean, what do you think about that? And then you come back and you adjust. So it's also a very iterative process. You're not going to solve it all in 1 3 or 8 hour period of time in a room. So involve your clients, your customers, whatever your company might do.
Thank you very much for being here. Let's give them a...
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thanks. We appreciate the opportunity.